cause us to question God, question God's justice, question God's reasons, question maybe in some cases and in some lives even God's presence in the kind of the trials of our lives. And so Jeremiah he's gonna raise a question, and the question is really gonna look like one question, but the question really is it's what's beneath that question that I'd like to try to focus on this morning. But I want to go beyond the question and beyond the response to a kind of a turning point that we find here in 12 that's important to make note of. And that turning point comes down, and I'm sorry, our core scripture is 1 through 13 this morning. We're going to pick up the remainder of the chapter because there's kind of two fundamental points we want to draw out of the remainder of the chapter. But our core is going to be really focused on 1 through 13. But that turning point I'm talking of is in verse 11. Speaking of Israel, it will be made a wasteland, parched and desolate before me. The whole land will be laid waste. And here's what I want you to just put in the back of your head. Because there is no one who cares. Now, if you kind of know what Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah is about, he is one of three major prophets that are speaking prior to the captivity of Israel. And this is a couple hundred years of warning that this is coming. So this isn't like new news. This has had generations and generations to be understood and responded to accordingly. And we get to this point, and God says this destruction of Jerusalem and the captivity is going to happen, and just as importantly, it's going to happen for a reason. Now, I'm highlighting the reason because reason is what Jeremiah's got on the table in the front end of this particular chapter. And the reason it is because no one cares. No one cares. Now, we're going to walk through this for a second, but God says, no one cares about me. He says that my inheritance has become to me like a lion in the forest, and she roars at me. Therefore, I hate her. So God's making it clear that of my chosen people, they don't care about me anymore. Now, this isn't the first time we've heard this. We've heard this a lot. We've heard this from multiple prophets, and it's not even in the history of Israel do we hear about this. We also hear it in Jesus' day, where people are very, very distant from God, and we're going to talk about that also. But we've been through this enough before to maybe make note of it, is that the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. That's what God's talking about here. My nation has grown completely apathetic. I had a last Monday morning, even before I even started working in 12, I read an article, and it had just come up on the Fox webpage, and I'm not a sucker for clickbait, but there's things that just capture my attention, and I pay attention to it. And the article is titled, "I Am a Psychopath." And that's kind of a strange thing to maybe to say, oh, that grabbed my attention. But that grabbed my attention. What kind of a person would say, oh, me, I'm a psychopath? And so I read the articles, and I'm not going to give this lady any particular notoriety or attention. She's got enough of that of her own, but she's an Australian lady, and evidently she's pretty popular in Australia, and she's pretty popular on the lecture circuit, and she's got a couple of well-published books throughout Australia right now. I don't know kind of how big they are globally, but this is not an unheard of lady, and the title of the article is "I'm a Psychopath." And so what she does in this article is she says, hey, I'm a psychopath. Where people care, I don't care. Where people have empathy, I don't have empathy. Where people are generous, I'm not generous. And she walks through all of these kind of normative conditions of human existence and says, but I'm not. And so I'm thinking in the first part of this article, this is no psychopath. Psychopaths don't know they're psychopaths. They just think everybody else thinks differently than they do, and they just go about living their lives. And from side of self-evident reality, that's some really twisted stuff, and that person can at best be benign and at worst be dangerous. And that's a That's a DSM-3 psychological disorder. That's serious, messed up stuff. But a psychopath doesn't say that about himself. Psychopath says that's the only lens they see through. And then I read a little bit more, and now she starts to justify why she's self-identified as a psychopath, and that is that she didn't want to bear the burden of all of life. It is so much easier not to care and not carry any burden than it is to care and carry burden. And so her position is not, I'm a psychopath. Her position is, I self-identify as a psychopath. And I do it as a means of self-preservation. And I've written a couple of books about it. And you can join me in this self-professed psychopathy if you want to. And then you can show up at my lectures too, and I can teach you all about how to not care. It's a choice. It's a choice not to care. And from her perspective, it's a philosophy that she has built to say that it is easier and less painful way to walk through this life not to care than it is to care. Because when you care, you lose. Now, she's not new to this. This is old. This is New Age yak that's really old age that's been remeshed and sold as New Age yak. That's the Buddhist. The Buddhist says don't get attached to anything. Don't like anything. Don't desire anything. Don't crave anything. Don't love. You detach yourself from emotional presence in the world, because desire is the pathway to loss, and loss is the pathway to pain. And if you want to purge pain from your life, you must purge desire from your life, which means you have to separate yourself from it. You know, it's the same basic thing. She's just selling books on it right now. It's a choice that we make. Now, sometimes we don't make that choice consciously or effectively, or build a kind of a philosophy that sells books and gets you invited on lecture circuits the way this fairly twisted young lady does. A lot of times we make that choice one little choice at a time. That we choose not to care or choose to distance ourselves from things that bring us pain, things that cause us discomfort. Or, in a more civil world, things that don't center themselves around me. In the polite society of the Western world, we like our comfort. We like things that make us feel good. We tend to step away from things that challenge us. We don't want anything interfering with our little soap operatic lives that we've made for ourselves. These little kingdoms of Todd that I built around myself that I don't want people messing with. And so after a while, that becomes a lifestyle. And after a while, that lifestyle becomes normative. And after a while, it becomes a culture. And it becomes a culture such that in Israel, we've already established in previous chapters in Jeremiah and in Isaiah, last year we were in Isaiah, that I don't care about other people. What I care about is building my kingdom. And I can justify that because I'm the chosen people of God. I'm Israel. And now God says, not only do you not care about each other, which we were just talking about last week to some degree and have been talking about for months, but you don't care about me either. And so Jeremiah is looking at this culture of Israel, and he's got a monumental question for God. So let's read chapter 12, verses 1 through 13, and step a little deeper in. You are always righteous, O Lord, when I bring a case before you, yet I would like to speak with you about your justice. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all the faithless live at ease? You have planted them, and they have taken root, and they grow, and they bear fruit, and you are always on their lips and far from their hearts. Yet you know me, O Lord. You see me, and test my thoughts about you. Now drag them off like sheep to be butchered. Set them apart for the day of slaughter. How long will the land lie parched, the grass of every field be withered? Because those who live there are wicked, and the animals and the birds have perished. Moreover, the people are saying, he will not see what happens to us. Now, if you have raced with horses, with men on foot, and they have worn you out, how can you compete with horses? And if you stumble and save country, how will you manage the thickets by the Jordan? If you haven't yet, I'm hoping you heard the change in voice. That first part was the lament, the challenge of Jeremiah, and then the response of the Lord begins. Your brothers are your own family. They have betrayed you, and they have raised a loud cry against you. Do not trust them, for they speak well of you. I will forsake the house and abandon my inheritance, and I will give the one I love into the hands of the enemies. My inheritance has become to me like a lion in the forest. She roars, and therefore I hate her. Has not my inheritance become to me like a speckled bird of prey that other birds of prey surround and attack? Go and gather the wild beast, bring them to devour. Many shepherds will ruin my vineyards and trample down my fields, and they will turn my pleasant field into a desolate wasteland. It will be made a wasteland, parched and desolate before me. The whole land will be laid waste, because there is no one who cares. Over all the barren heights in the desert, destroyers will swarm. For the sword of the Lord will devour from one end of the land to the other, and no one will be safe. They will sow wheat but reap thorns. They will wear themselves out and gain nothing. So bear the shame of your harvest because the Lord's fierce anger. Now we're going to stop there because that pretty much encapsulates Jeremiah's concern and God's response, and that's where we're going to focus. Jeremiah he speaks clearly at the beginning of this. You, O Lord, are always right. You are always righteous, O Lord, when I bring a case before you. There's lots of reasons we ask questions. They fall into two fundamental categories. One is doubt. What I have is a question of disbelief. I don't believe what you have to. The other is an honest search for information. I don't understand, but I trust you do, and so I'm asking you to help me understand. Now again, there's lots of reasons that people ask questions, but if you distill them, they fall into principally one of those two categories. I don't believe or I don't understand. That's it. So Jeremiah makes it pretty clear on the front end that I'm not God. I recognize that, one, you're righteous, and whenever I bring a question before you, you treat me with respect on that. So out of that respect for you, I don't understand. So I want to ask you about your justice. Now, if you read deeper down in this, which we will, you're going to find out it's not just the justice that Jeremiah is concerned about. Because Jeremiah does frame it as justice, not justness. He's framing it as justice. But what he's really getting at is accountability. It's not just that Israel does these things and they seem to get away with it, and that I'm questioning your justice. I'm really questioning the accountability. Why do these things happen and there's no apparent accountability? How can these people be so apathetic towards each other and towards you, and there's no accountability? And the accountability issue is really fleshed out in how Jeremiah frames the balance of his lament here. So I want to walk through that here so we can see this. But the question on the table is what Jeremiah calls the justice of God. At the core of it, though, is accountability. It's not that I don't believe you're unjust. It's just that I don't see where we live accountable. So I put a question at the top of my little scripts. I make notes all over it. Is there no accountability for apathy? That's how I frame Jeremiah's question. Are we not accountable for not caring? And the big picture answer to that question is, well, absolutely, there's accountability for apathy. That's why Sodom and Gomorrah were restored. Lots and lots of sins. But the two that God isolated was, you didn't care about the widows and you didn't care about the orphans. The most fragile, frail people of your culture, you didn't care about. You built your lives and engorged yourself in your wealth and your prosperity and your position and power, all on the backs of the most fragile. So let's continue in here. You are always righteous, O Lord, when I bring a case before you, yet I would speak with you about your justice. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do the faithless live at ease? So he's put it all on the table here to say, this is my big question. And then it almost sounds accusatory, but it's more of just a frame of the nature of the question. You have planted them and they've taken root. They grow and bear fruit. You're always on their lips, but far from their heart. Now I want to break that one apart. You planted them, you gave them this land. And they've taken advantage of the land. The land is bearing fruit. They're enjoying their lives in this land. As roaring lions in the forest who roar at you when you go by, as people who don't care about their neighbors as themselves, their brothers as themselves. You know, but they prosper here. But then he really he almost begins to answer his own question. He says, you are always on their lips and far from their hearts. Now, this is where he starts to lay out the accusation against Israel. You're always on their lips and far from them. That should be fairly familiar language to you. I will want to go back. The earliest place that I see that accountability, and again, we're at the level of accountability, not just the justness of God, but the accountability God holds them to. That comes back from in Deuteronomy. At this point, Israel is traveling through the desert. Yes, there's a lot of challenge of God. Yes, there is judgment of God in these cycles of discontent, and then claim against God, and then there's a judgment, and then there's a restoration, and then a discontent and a claim, and a judgment and a restoration. And that cycle is going on in the desert. And Moses is reminding Israel that, don't you see this cycle? Don't you understand that this is what's happening in our lives here, that we keep going through this same cycle? And so Moses calls them together and says that the Lord's voice is not an unheard voice. The Lord's voice is an authoritative voice. And so Israel says now in chapter 5, starting at verse 7, go near and listen to what the Lord our God says. And then tell us whatever the Lord God says, and we will listen and we will obey. So there's the pronouncement. If you just go listen to what God has to say. There was previously they said, if we hear anything more from him, we'll surely die. If you go, you tell us what is it, and we will listen and we'll obey. Then the Lord heard you when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, I have heard what these people say. Everything they said is good, but oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep my commands always, so that might go well with them and with their children forever. That's what I want you to hear for a minute. The lament of God back. Jeremiah has put a lament on the table. One of the table is that I don't see any accountability. Where I don't see accountability, I've got a question about justice. And he's the one, Jeremiah is the one that raises, you are always on their lips but far from their hearts. This is what God's been dealing with long before Jeremiah comes along. And the perspective is valuable here. There's a perspective that Jeremiah offers, and there's a perspective that God offers. And the perspective that God offers is his, do you think this isn't the first time I've heard such a thing? Oh, that their hearts would be inclined towards me. It's not enough that they have ears to hear and listen, and it's not enough that they'll profess with their lips that they will obey. That's dime a dozen. All of us make those decisions and those pronouncements in times of ease and plenty. Oh yeah, just whatever you want, God. You just tell me what you want, and I'll do what you want. But your hearts are not inclined towards me. Your heart, the conviction of your heart does not carry you through the tougher times of your lives. You will abandon me and stand in the forest and roar at me as a roaring lion as soon as things don't go your way. And after a while, you'll build that to be normative. And after a while, that normative nature of your personality types will become a collective culture. And before long, as an entire nation, you will have abandoned me. And you will have allied yourselves against me. Oh, that your hearts would be inclined towards me. Hear God's lament. Before you focus too much on Jeremiah's lament about Israel, hear God's lament about Israel. Y'all make all kinds of professions that you have no intentions of ever keeping. If your hearts were inclined towards me, there would be peace in the camp. Yet you know me, still in the voice of Jeremiah. Yet you know me, O Lord, and you see me, and you test my thoughts about you. Jeremiah is making a comparative analysis here. I listen. I obey. You test my thoughts. You hold me accountable. What about them? What about those guys? I know what it's like when you do hold me accountable. I know what it's like when you speak to me and you expect me to hear and obey. I know what it's like to live a life in the discipline of a heart inclined towards you. But what about them? Does that ring a bell for anybody? You ever thought, I discipline my life, I focus my life, I I truly desire to live a pious life, and yet it seems like the favor and the opportunity and the quick go to the ways of the world. To me, there have been times in my life where I felt a bit slighted by that. I have to honestly say, I don't sense that nearly as much as once I did. But there was certainly a time in my life when I felt severely slighted by the conniving of the wicked and the thriving of the wicked at the expense of the straight life. I'll say this did hit me pretty hard one time. 15 years ago, there was an ice storm, and it said just crushing trees everywhere. Just everything cut off. Everything was a mess. We were out without power for I think a week, and we get up in the morning, and I see that I can't even get my car out of the garage into the driveway, or if I did, I can't get it down the service alley down to 3rd Street because everything was totally covered with limbs and full sections of trees that are down and covered with ice. So I didn't see any option. I just go out the garage, fire up the chainsaw, and go to work. You have to cut your way out of this thing. And so it's kind of sleet, raining, it's cold, it's wet, and I'm working all morning, and I'm tired, and I finally get enough cut a way to get out of the garage, and I start cutting my way down 3rd Street alley to get to 3rd Street, only to find out that 3rd Street is just as bad as everything else, and I'm totally exhausted. I've been working all day to do this, and so I was able to pull enough away from 3rd Street to get us out onto Broadway. The city was already working on Broadway, and so now I have a path for me and my neighbors to get out of here. And right when I get back up to my house, multiple tanks of fuel in the chainsaw. I'm sweating underneath. Everything else is just freezing to death out here. I'm a total mess. And I get back up to ours, and up the alley comes this totally spotless, perfectly washed, red Cherokee Jeep. And out of it gets a man of a particular flamboyant persuasion smoking a Tipperillo. And he literally puts his hand in his pocket, flips his Tipperillo out in the air, and he says, "Well, I must be living right, because I haven't even lost power on New Street." And he starts flipping his Tipperillo around, and I'm saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe this." Now, I know this guy because he's a friend of somebody down the street, and I know his particular deviant persuasion, and which was on full regalia in this, and I'm thinking, the only reason you got up here is because I cut this path. And I'm seriously challenged with what's the justice in this right now. So it's not like I've not felt that before. I just feel a whole lot less now than once I did. And I think that event probably had a little bit to do with it, because I know that in the end there is a justice. And I know that Jeremiah knows that in the end there is a justice, but he's struggling with it because he's looking at the here and the now and saying, I should see it now. And he actually says that. Drag them off like sheep to be butchered and set them apart for the day of slaughter. This is Jeremiah's definition of justice. This is what I want. Honestly, I wanted to take my chainsaw through the foot of that Cherokee too. That's what I want. I want you to drag them off like sheep before slaughter, and I want you to set them apart for the day of destruction. Not me, of course, them, but that's that. Now that would satisfy me. That's that little perspective that Jeremiah has. Remember, God, all the way back in the book of Deuteronomy, oh, that their hearts would be. Jeremiah, I've been dealing with this for a long time. I'm slow to anger, quick to forgive. Yes, there's judgment. There's always a remnant. And what you're dealing with right now is a long, centuries-old cycle of me shaping and forming people who will incline their hearts towards me. You're looking through a very narrow window of a very, very big picture, Jeremiah. And this is where Jeremiah hears from God. Oh, gosh, there's one more piece in this, and then we will. Jeremiah continues in his lament. How long will the land lie parched? The grass of every field be withered, because those who live in it are wicked. The animals and the birds have perished. Moreover, the people are saying, he will not see what happens to us. This is Jeremiah saying that even the firmament has a voice in this, God. I mean, even if you're not listening to me, drag those people off like a day of slaughter and set them apart for the day of destruction. Just look at the land. Even the land has a voice. The land's perishing right beneath us right now because of the wickedness of the land. If you know the Arthurian legend, that's the kind of the part of that legend of Arthur, in that the unaccounted for sin of Lancelot has placed a death sickness upon King Arthur, and all of the land refuses to produce, and starvation and pestilence has plagued the land. And it's not until Lancelot can retrieve the cup and give Arthur the drink that Arthur is healed and the land is restored. That the idea of the land failing even, and I'm not hinging on Arthur, I'm just citing that as a piece of popular culture that we're familiar with, but that's the fall. Remember what God said to Adam in the garden, standing there with Eve? Eve, because of what you've done, childbirth, child rearing, the whole process of procreating is going to be a very painful thing for you. And Adam, there's no peace between you and the land any longer. That this land there will be an enmity between you and the land, and that you'll have to work it by the sweat of your brow. And when we're used to it produced good fruit for you of its own accord, you're now going to work it, and a lot of what you're going to get is just thorns and thistle. There's the failure of you to live at peace with me gives even voice to the firmament that the fall is still in effect in this world. This is what's happened. This is what Jeremiah. If you remember, it's in Isaiah 55, I think. You go out with joy. God's talking about Israel, and you live at peace with me. This is the nature. You'll go out with joy, and the trees of the field will clap their hands. When Jesus is confronted by the Pharisees, and they say, you need to tell these disciples of yours to quit talking about this Messiah thing in you. And Jesus says that if they're silent, even the very rocks will cry out. Even the firmament has a voice that testifies to the justice of God. That's what Jeremiah is looking at here right now. That even how long will the land lie parched? This is the land lie parched is not maybe not the fairest of translations here. The actual Hebrew here says that how long will the land mourn or grieve? That's the Hebrew language. God, how long will the land just mourn over what has happened here? If you're not concerned about my lament, listen to the very firmament itself. The land aches, it groans, it mourns because of what has happened here. Now, God's response, starting at verse 5. If you've raced with men on foot, and they've worn you out, how can you compete with the horses? And if you stumble in safe ground, how will you manage the thickets of the Jordan? Now, I always try to place myself in the shoes of the man listening to God. So when I'm reading this, I take it personally, and I put myself in Jeremiah, and I'm trying to embrace to the greatest degree possible what Jeremiah is thinking and why he's thinking it, and what's the nature of the question, and we're at the point of accountability. And now God speaks, and he's talking about running with horses and worn out and travel in safe ground and thickets of the Jordan. I don't get it. Is that the kind of response that you were expecting from God if you lay out that lament of justice and accountability and apathy towards you? Is that what you were expecting God to say? I wasn't. I'm not expecting that back. So what that tells me is that there's something that God is saying that is much deeper than simply an answer to my lament, an answer to my question about the justice of God, specifically the accountability of God. So for me, as a student of the Bible, I'm asking, well, what is it? What am I missing about God's response? Since I trust that this is one of the reasons you asked the question, I honestly don't know. I'm in an honest search for answers. I'm not challenging you on this. I just don't know what it is you're telling me. So I'm back. I'm in that position right now. I'm asking, what is it that we're talking about when you say you've raced with men on foot and they have worn you out? How can you run with horses? Or if you stumble in safe country, how will you manage the thickets of the Jordan? And to help with that second one, there's a little more literal translation of what that second one is. When you stumble in safe country, how will you manage the thickets by the Jordan. That's better rendered is, if you trust in the land of your safety, what will you do when the Jordan floods? That's the more literal translation of that. And if you've been in an earthquake or if you've been in a flood, you become in what was the pasture you tilled, the house you lived in, the streets you drove, is now completely hostile to you. There is no safety when a flood comes and wipes it all away. And if you challenge it, you too will drown in the flood. And what was once safe land is now treacherous land that will devour you in the nature of the flood. That's the truer translation of that particular passage. So what's God saying there? What's God saying there is what's God saying largely from the beginning. He just hasn't voiced it yet. You're looking through a straw, Jeremiah, at a huge picture of my relationship with my people. You serve in this tiny sliver of time of my calling of you in my people. But my people were around long before you got here. My people will be around long after you've gone. But right now, I'm calling you to serve here. And I'm asking you to see through my eyes here. If you can't manage, if you're frustrated by the nature of human justice, which you've already put on the table, because what you've said is you want them wiped off the face of the earth, sent like sheep to slaughter, reserved for the day of destruction. Well, that's just no more than the voice of every other ruler, every other authority, every other mankind. If you cross the highest governing authority in your life, you die for it. I mean, can you point out a nation that doesn't do that, Jeremiah? That's how you see. So if that's how you see, what are you going to do when you start to look through my eyes? What are you going to do if running with men wears you out and now it's time to run with the horses? Do you see the picture? What are you going to do when you travel safe ground but the flood comes? What God's doing is saying, Jeremiah, you must see with a broader set of eyes. Because if I let you stand right now in the position that you're in right now, you will be of no use to the people that I call you to. Because you're ready to hang it up now. You're ready to pass your ultimate final judgment upon these people right now. And I'm doing everything to preserve them. I'm giving them every opportunity to hear and obey and incline their heart towards me. I'm not here to wipe them off of the face of the earth. I'm here to redeem them from it. And if you don't hear that from the third challenge of Lucifer to Jesus and that so-called temptation in the desert, hear that from him. Bow down and worship me, and I'll give you dominion over all the kingdoms of the earth. What a laughable thing to say. I didn't come here to have dominion over them in the earth. I came to redeem them from the ways and means of this earth. From God's perspective to Jeremiah, I am working at a much grander scale than you see. So I'm going to open this up a little bit for you. And it may surprise you a little bit. You might find a little reconciliation in it. Your brothers of your own family, even they have betrayed you, and they've raised a loud cry against you. Don't trust them, though they speak well of you. First thing is, even you're deceived, Jeremiah. Even you think that there's some enclave, there's some goodness, there's some reconciliation amongst these people. The closest people to you are stabbing you in the back right now. This is why I called you. I called you to separate you out, to sanctify you from Israel such that you can speak to Israel. And even the closest people, your own family, although they speak well of you, be forewarned that it's you and me. Okay, I've only got a couple of minutes here. I'll forsake the house that abandoned my inheritance. I will give the one I love into the hands of their enemies. My inheritance has become to me like a lion in the forest, and it roars at me, therefore I hate her. Has not my inheritance become like a speckled bird of prey, a bird of prey that other birds of prey surround and attack? Very clearly what God is saying is, I hear what you're saying, but it's just a much bigger issue than you think it is. And I am There is accountability for apathy. If that's that's my phraseology of the kind of the big question. Is there accountability for apathy? The answer is yes. But this is God now answering the question. Yes, there's accountability for apathy. Yeah, I'm gonna give them into the hands of their enemies. Judgment is to come. Go and gather the wild beasts, bring them and devour. The shepherds will ruin my vineyard and trample down my fields. They will turn my pleasant fields into desolate wasteland. It will be made a wasteland, parched, desolate before me. The whole land will be laid waste because there is no one who cares. This is where God actually helps Jeremiah see the depth of what he's talking about. No one cares. That's what concerns me more. The prostitution in the streets, yeah, that bothers me. The shedding of innocent blood, yeah, that's of great concern to me. The theft, the cheating, the dishonesty, the abuse of power, the privilege of the self-entitled, the idolatry spoken of by Ezekiel, all of these things bother me. But they all of them fall into a single category. My people do not care. That's my greatest lament. My people simply don't care. All over the barren heights and the desert, destroyers will swarm, and the sword of the Lord will devour them from one end of the land to the other. Don't think that this is, when this happens, don't think that this is just the same as one nation warring against another. You've seen it from the dawn of time. There's always kingdoms that rise and fall, and they grow their kingdoms by devouring other kingdoms. They grow their land, their wealth, their people, their population. By every measure that a nation measures itself, they do it by war, do it by sword. Don't think that's what's going on here. This is the sword of the Lord. When what happens to Israel, this is not other nations expanding their own kingdoms. This is my hand of judgment on my people. You still with me, Jeremiah? They will sow wheat and reap thorns. They will wear themselves out but gain nothing. So bear the shame of your harvest because of the Lord's fierce anger. Now, that's the end of our core scripture. I want to highlight two things because I know we're right at the end of our time. From 14 to the end of the chapter, there's two things that God says. First is, starting with verse 15, but after I uproot them, I will again have compassion. I will bring each of them back to his own inheritance and to his own country. Each of them referring to each of the tribes. Each of them. The tribes of my people, the 12 tribes of Israel, I will restore them. Basically, just as quickly as we can be about this is the remnant. Jeremiah, your idea was slaughter, day of destruction. My idea is salvation. Your justice is to destroy. My justice is to save. There is judgment in this process, but I will keep a remnant. So before you're too quick to pass a judgment upon my people in my hearing, I want you to know what the big picture is. What happens when you race with men and they wear you out? What are you going to do when you run with horses? That's the difference that I want you to see here. If you're going to ask me this question, be prepared for the answer that I'm going to give you. And it's not the answer that you think. It's much bigger than you think. You're here to destroy those who offend you. I'm here to save through that offense a remnant of my people. And the second thing that God says is, but if any, and this is verse 17, this is the last verse in the chapter, but if any nation does not listen, I will completely uproot and destroy it, declares the Lord. Now, all of a sudden we've turned our attention away from Israel and to everything that is not Israel. So you understand the nature of divine justice, divine justness. This isn't just Israel. Remember, judgment begins in the house of the Lord. We've spent this entire chapter talking about Israel. But all of a sudden in this last sentence, now we're talking about everything that is not Israel. Judgment begins in the house of the Lord. But I want you to know this too. In the justice and the justness that I bring to the table, Jeremiah, that you don't see, any nation who defies me in such a way that is not my people, the nations of the world, I will uproot and destroy. Uproot and destroy, declares the Lord. So as we got to close this morning, as we finish this morning, this is not any different than what Jesus had to say about why he came. I came to seek and save that which is lost. I didn't come to destroy. There will be judgment in the process. There is a separation of the wheat from the chaff. There are those who hear and those who do not. But my goal is not to judge, it is to save. But judgment is a part of salvation. When I look at this, when I look at chapter 12, there may be other kind of seminal points in Jeremiah, but this is a seminal point to declare that all of this is happening simply because people don't care. And if you want to attempt to exercise some philosophical self-identification as a psychopath, have at it. And see what that life yields for you. But God's saying that for those who actively don't care, those who passively don't care, those who indiscriminately don't care, those who apathetically don't care, it's all the same. You must care about the widows and the orphans. You must love your neighbor as yourself. In the words of God to Cain, your brother's blood cries out from the ground to me because you thought so little of someone else that you would kill your own brother. And if you follow that piece of history, the judgment upon Cain was that the land would not produce for you. A totally different issue, whole lot to go into there, won't go in there now. Thoughts before we close this morning? Okay, we do have to close this morning. Dalton, could you close us in prayer?
My Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for this class and this morning, that we can be here, Father, and worship in spirit and truth. We thank you for Brother Todd, the message he presented to us today. May it weigh heavily on our hearts, Lord, as we walk through the days and weeks ahead. Remembering, Lord, that your love, that you're slow to anger, and Father, you want us to be, Father, the best that we can be. We're grateful, Lord, that you're the God of second chance, always giving us an opportunity, Lord, to come back to you. We ask that you keep us on firm ground on our path. We thank you for this class, for the church, for Pastor Osmond's sermon today, the one that he will give coming up. And we ask you to be with us, Father, today, and all those requests for those that need healing and a touch. We ask your Father, love and forgiveness, and we praise you, Father, from the bottom of our heart for everything you've done for us in Christ Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. I'm sorry? Oh, right, yeah.
I can't sing like that.